Hello, guys, and welcome to a new episode of Comic Uno. And I am here with a special guest. Alex, introduce yourself. What is going on?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm Alex Segura. I'm a crime writer, novelist, and comic book writer, co-president of Archie by day, and I have a new Kickstarter that just launched last Tuesday called The Dusk. And
Very
the
cool.
Dusk, should I give you the kind of 40,000
Go
feet on
for
it, I
it.
guess? Yeah.
Yeah, please
Okay.
do.
Yeah, so the Dusk, it's basically our take on the street level crime fighter genre, but it was inspired from watching my own son, who's 5, read comics. Comics that probably you and I grew up on, like Batman and Spider Man and stuff like that. But wanting to create a hero for him that maybe wasn't all about just punching the bad guys and throwing them into prison, like maybe adding a little bit of nuance to the story while still retaining the things we love about superheroes, like the colorful worlds, the villains, the kind of fictional city, and not doing it in a super grim, gritty, dark way.
Yeah, when first, like, just having you have a Kickstarter, I was super excited about. But then I actually saw what it was about. I'm like, oh my God, this seems so cool. I'm so
Oh,
excited.
good. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know. We've been
but
talking about it for a while. I think I was like picking your brain months ago. Like, I think I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to do this.
yeah, how long has it been? Like, because like I know for me and you, we chatted a couple of months ago, but like for you, like how long has this been in plans? Why Kickstarter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, the big thing was we wanted to retain control. And by me, I mean myself, the co writer Elizabeth Little, who's a crime novelist like me, and David Hahn, who's the artist. And he's done a bunch of cool stuff like Bike Club and Batman 66 meets Wonder Woman 77 and a lot of indie stuff. He's an Eisner winner. So we're the three of us are parents. We felt really close to the story, and we didn't really want to do the whole gauntlet of pitching it to everybody and then having another party like have a say. So then we brought in Joe Illidge, who's got a huge, long, wonderful resume as an editor, and we wanted him to be the editorial voice. And that's kind of when we all settled on Kickstarter. And that's also when I started talking to Ron Mars at Ominous Press. And Ominous is a publisher, but they specialize in handling Kickstarters. So they handle some of the promotion, some of the distribution, and the printing and things like that. But they've been a huge help. So I can just kind of zoom out and do the work. We can do the work, but also like amplify the stuff they do without not being as much in the weeds. Just because I don't think any of us really had the bandwidth to do it to that degree.
I 100% feel you
Yeah.
on that as I have a Kickstarter going on right now and I'm questioning my bandwidth every day.
Yeah, it's just so much. And even partnering with Ominous, I feel like it's like a third full-time job, with Archie and then my writing and then also like maintaining the Kickstarter. Like I've had the tab open since well before the app the thing launched, just refreshing and seeing like where we're at. So I could probably tell you now in real time where we're at.
You probably have a phantom limb after. Well, I know for definitely what happens after I have a Kickstarter. At least a week later, you'll go on Kickstarter and be like, "Wait, I have nothing to check. Why am I here?" you know?
I know. Yeah, I imagine that. I just want it to get funded, and I think then I'll give a sigh of relief and maybe close the tab for like 20 minutes before I open it again.
So right now it's 5 minutes, then it'll be every 20 minutes, which I'm sure you guys are going to get there. You're really close, but for people that are listening, definitely go check out the Kickstarter. There's a lot of great options. Honestly, I just changed my backing because originally I was just getting the issue 1 physical, and then
Uh-huh.
like as I was getting into it more, I was like, man, like I didn't notice it was a graphic novel at first. I'm like, well, I want all of it, so I got the
Yeah,
digital
yeah.
copy of it all. So
Oh,
that
good.
happened like
Yeah.
as I was doing research on for this interview. It's like, wait.
Uh,
I want them all. I want all the issues.
yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think as it's funny. The challenge is you have to keep plugging like pretty much all the time, and that goes against my mindset. I'll plug something if I do an interview or if I do something, and then you have something you can promote. But if you're just hammering the same thing, so I'll plug it when I have something new. Like today, we debuted the lobby cards, and I teased this new cover that Wilfredo Torres did. So yeah, it's just a lot. It's a lot to keep up.
It is so much. And what do you feel like you've learned through this process? Again, we were talking a couple of months ago and just like shooting the breeze about Kickstarter. Like, what do you feel like from that moment to now you've learned about the platform?
I think it's I think it's such a valuable path for creators that maybe don't have the connections in the industry and don't want to go through gatekeepers, either or both. If you're starting out and you just put your comic together and you don't know like editors to pitch and you don't understand what the process is, but you have this story and you have this team and like how to put a book together. I think it speeds up the indie process that people used to do like 10, 15 years ago when you just kind of print out your own zine and hand it out at a show. Like this is your way of getting your book out there. And creating your own fan base instead of having to go through a publisher. And for me, it's different because, working at Archie, it's a little bit trickier for me to I can't just go pitch everybody. I work at a publisher, so there's a conflict there. So it was a good way to make this really personal story into a reality without having to, give your baby away to somebody else. Like sometimes you just want to control every aspect. And I think that's Kickstarter gives you that chance.
Now, working from the other side, working for Archie and knowing about pitching, do you feel like there's a life after these Kickstarter books? So and obviously we have seen it, but the industry has been changing so much with this whole year, and I'm sure it's going to change even more. And Kickstarter has been such a big part of that. Do you feel like other publishers are going to really utilize Kickstarter as we've been seeing? But do you think they're going to scout Kickstarter more and have a life outside of Kickstarter and share both retailer and, crowdfunding?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think I mentioned this before, and maybe we talked about it, but I think there is a lot of money on the table if somebody figures out a pipeline between Kickstarter and, comic shop distribution. Like if, Kickstarter announced this relationship with bookshop.org, which is that indie facing kind of response to Amazon, where you can order books from your favorite indie bookstore from them and 10% goes to your indie bookstore. I imagine there's a way for them to partner. I'm not telling them what to do by any means, but I think if there was a way for someone to launch a Kickstarter, have a tier that isn't just, hey, retailers order 10 copies at a discount, but was actually something that could literally get your books into shops or get you into the previews catalog or whatever that may be for other distributors, I think you'd see a lot more people do it and use it more routinely. Like at this point, what you're hoping for, if you do a Kickstarter, like in a traditional way, you're hoping that you get the Kickstarter funded, you get to fulfill the orders, and then you have enough that maybe someone will come knocking and say, hey, we'd love to sell this to comic shops. And I think that's what you've seen that a lot. You see a lot of publishers that I think The Pride, which was Joe Glass's Kickstarter, many times over, was picked up by Dark Horse, and they put out an omnibus of it. Well, actually, no, that was a Comixology Originals, but
yeah, but then Dark Horse did that partnership, right?
Right. So I do think there's been some people have kind of made strides in having their Kickstarter made into traditional comic books where they're distributed and put out by a publisher. So I think it's the best kind of business card because the work is done, the files exist, and it's paid for. And I think publishers are looking for ways to produce more books without maybe having to fund them all, which sounds kind of messy, but it's an opportunity, I think.
I 100% agree. And now jumping into more of the book, you're describing a little bit about how you came up with the idea for the comic, but can you from idea to script, how did that all come together for the Dusk?
Yeah, I think the big theoretical idea came to me when I was reading with my son, and I was like, I really want something that he can read, that we can read together, that I would enjoy as a longtime comic fan, but that he would also enjoy as a kid, as that also sends the right message without feeling like homework. Because sometimes as kids, like our parents will give us something and it just feels like a little bit too lectury. And I wanted to give him something that he could just be like, oh, cool, this is awesome. And then kind of absorb the idea that we live in a much more complicated world where it's not just so easy to solve problems with your fist and violence, which isn't to say that Dusk doesn't do that. He's learning. The first arc is really him learning. Like he's a public defender. His name's Jaime Nuñez. He's from Miami. He moves to this very Philadelphia-esque city called Blackstone. And he starts working as a public defender because he was going to be a baseball star. He got injured and then he just couldn't make it. And so thankfully he had this education to fall back on. And his first thought is, how do I do some good in this city that's kind of falling apart? So he becomes a public defender. But he also realizes that he can't do as much good as he wants just through the law. He sees the cracks in the system as he's doing it. And at the same time, he comes into this unexpected fortune. And that's part of the mystery of the graphic novel. Like, where did this money come from? Who's behind it? What's Jaime's backstory? And is the person that's gifted him this money actually altruistic? Like, is it someone that actually wants to do some good as well? Or is it like a bigger play? So Jaime comes into this money, and he also discovers this cachet of superhero stuff, costumes, weapons, things like that. And he starts to wonder if, like, can I utilize this stuff to do a little bit more good than I could just do behind a desk? And that's where the learning begins, because his instinct at first is, let me just punch this guy and throw him into jail, and the traditional kind of superhero action. But at the same time, he starts to learn and change and evolve. And that's the journey. And it's also told in all ages is a weird term, because I think people immediately think, oh, it's just for kids. But it literally is. The story we're telling is for all ages. It's going to be entertaining to a kid as in a different way than it would be for someone like us, where we're kind of much more grizzled comic fans. But someone said the question, and that's actually very true. Like, the Denny O'Neil question stuff was a huge influence on everything I write.
And speaking of influence, one thing when I saw the artwork, I was like, oh man, this kind of reminds me of Batman the Animated Series. Was that something you were going for with the vibe? You were talking about Batman before, but specifically Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah, to me, Batman the Animated Series is like the perfect synthesis of Batman. Like, it takes all the best elements of the comics and the movies and everything else, and what you get is like the peak of each of the characters, like the best interpretations. And they're much more, if they rebooted the entire Batman universe and it was Batman the Animated Series, I think everyone would be happy. Like, it's not complicated, it's direct, the characters are conflicted, there's a lot of nuance to it. Like, if I watch it now as an adult, I get so many different things out of it than I did when I watched it as a 12-year-old after school. And that's the hope. That's like the big touchstone, to do something that can affect people of so many ages. But that's a big reason why we reached out to David, because his art evokes that so well, but he also adds this kind of indie vibe to it, like this little touch of Love and Rockets, because he's drawn so many different kinds of things. And so it felt like the perfect blend. Like, his art is clear and dynamic and engaging, but it doesn't feel complicated. And it feels like something you could hand to anyone and they would understand what's going on. But yeah, totally Batman the Animated Series is a huge influence for us.
Now, of course, I follow you on Twitter, and one of my favorite things that you tweet about is Taylor Swift. So,
yes.
And her noir, the theories of her music. So, what do you enjoy about Taylor Swift? But that's not what we're talking about here. But especially noir. Hey, let's talk about Taylor Swift then, because I'm right here. Yeah. Let's talk about it. What do you enjoy about Taylor Swift? Would you want to write a comic about the things you enjoy about her music?
I mean, I think she's just hugely underrated as a songwriter, and she's just talented. I just, and I kind of came to it late, and I'm not really as much of a fan of her early stuff, like the more country stuff, not because I don't like country. It just doesn't resonate. But the, from Red on up to the present day, I think she hasn't made a bad record. And, she pushes herself, and she's willing to kind of show her emotions and really be raw with the listener. And she's savvy enough to partner with really great producers and musicians, and the guest spots on her songs are always amazing. I just find her entertaining. I mean, I grew up listening to stuff like Madonna and Gloria Estefan, so it was not a huge leap to like pop stars like, her, Lady Gaga, St. Vincent. I mean, that's a lot of the stuff that I listen to still. Like, I listen to a lot of other stuff, but that's I'm always in that space. Like, I think pop and rock are not too far away. Like, you can enjoy it. You don't have to enjoy only one genre of music. Actually, we did reach out to her to try and do an Archie meets Taylor Swift way back when we were still doing the Archie's book. And I got as far as like her PR person, and she very politely said Taylor is very busy. So maybe someday. But Joe Eisma, who's the artist, was the artist on the Archies, even did like a spec graphic that we sent to her. So.
Oh, that would have been I would have loved seeing that. That would have been so cool. But yeah, no, I agree. Like, honestly, for me, I became a fan later on. Like, I grew up with her. Like, I remember her first album. I was in grammar school, so I was like, oh, I really so I'm 26, so it was like, okay, I like her music and I grew up with it. But then when I was in high school, college, I'm like, all right, whatever, Taylor Swift. And then I think recently, especially the past 5 years, and then obviously folklore on it's just like, oh man, you're redefining yourself as an artist. So it's really cool. But yeah, especially, you relating her to the noir genre, and how do you where do you see that connection? And has it helped you with any storytelling to see her art, and how she connects to your favorite genre?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think people use the term noir like interchangeably with just crime, and it's a very different thing. For me, noir is, comes from, film noir, and noir is about putting people in a corner. Like, you've done something that you have to either hide or that could irrevocably damage your life. And like, what do people do in desperate situations when they're under extreme pressure? And that's what noir is. It's about unhappy endings, like the gray areas of life, and the limits we'll push to get what we want. Like, Double Indemnity is a movie about an insurance guy, but it's much darker than that. Like, he has to really he's tempted by this femme fatale. He's like driven to like hide a murder. And you see a lot of those themes in her stories. Like, but the thing I wrote in the essay, which came out around right before Lover came out, so I hadn't heard Lover yet, even though Lover has a lot of noir stuff as well. Reputation is loaded with stuff like femme fatale imagery, murder, crime, betrayal is a huge part of noir, and just this sense of being alone and being her only hero. So she kind of blends the idea of the private eye and the femme fatale into one persona that you see like throughout that album. And you can see it a little bit in some of the earlier records, but for me, Reputation is probably her most noir.
And I feel like that was also such a turning point of her career, because that was when she's like, I'm going to be a pop star. But then again, what I love about her is that she's able to evolve and not say, I'm a country star, I'm a pop star. Because again, if you look at folklore, that's not pop. It's not. So
it's like almost it's indie rock, basically. She's working with the guys from what's the name of the band? Now I'm blanking on the she's just working with indie, like
the Bleachers, right? The guy from
yeah, and Bon Iver and the National, like people from different, like, they're not indie, I guess. I mean, they're probably on major labels, but they're definitely like not pop stars, I guess.
Yeah, it's super interesting to see that. And, going back into the comic stuff, how do you feel like that the Dusk fits into the genre noir? And if so, how do you make it different from your previous works?
I think it does, and I think the biggest difference is, I think the contrast I've been using is you have something like The Black Ghost, which is from my creator-owned book from Comixology Originals. It's coming from Dark Horse. They're reprinting it for the comic market, the print market, and that's a story about a woman like Laura who's like hit bottom. She's like in her darkest place, and she has to kind of crawl out of that to become a hero. Whereas Jaime is a little bit more put together. Like, he's a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. I think I liken him more to like Wally West in terms of his vibe. Like, he's not dark or brooding or evil. Not evil, but like, there's no psychosis to him in the way that like Batman is. Like, some people write him like he's just like so obsessed that it borders on like mental, like some kind of extreme situation. Whereas Jaime is really just a good-hearted guy who wants to do good. He's willing to do this. He's a dad. He like works as a public defender, like, which isn't to say one is better than the other, but I definitely wanted to have a take that was a little more lighthearted and without being like cheeky or too funny. Like, there's stakes and there's threats to him, and it's not just like laughs, but I wanted him to have a little bit more Wally West and Peter Parker and less like brooding avenger of the night, because we've seen that so many times. Like, so it is noir. I think there's noir elements. Like, he's going to deal with some threats and some challenges that he wasn't expecting, but I think he's going to come at it from a much lighter place. And that kind of also dovetails with the theme, like the dusk, like, either it's like the beginning of the light or the end of the light, but there's still some light there. And that's him kind of.
And you also mentioned that he's, or at least was, a baseball player. And one thing I really enjoy in superhero comics is the blending of genres. And obviously baseball is a sports story, and we don't really get to see that very often in comics. Do you play with that at all? Or is it really just a setup to like, okay, he's going to be the Dusk and that's it? Or do we actually get to see some baseball scenes?
We will get to see some baseball scenes. I'm I'm not a secret sports guy. I grew up with sports, so I don't talk about them that much, I guess, on Twitter or whatever. But, I'm always interested in adding that into fiction. Like I've written a bunch of short stories that are set in sports, in the sports world. Like I wrote a football short story that won an Anthony Award, which is a big deal in the mystery community. But I wanted him to have a background that showed the reader that it was believable that he was this agile, like physically fit person. Like usually you see like, oh, they were in the military or they were boxers. And I wanted a little bit of like more of an agile perspective. Like he can jump around and he's physically fit. Like it's believable that he's fit. And then you find out that he did have some training, but it's not so much like he toured the world and learned from every sensei and became like this unstoppable machine, which is great. Like I love Batman, but I wanted to contrast it as well. So there's going to be some baseball. He's a fan, and I wanted to play with the idea that what happens when you put all your eggs into one basket. Like you think, okay, I'm going to be a baseball star. This is all I'm going to do. I'm going to fight. And then you have this injury, which is very common. You have an injury in college that just destroys your knee or like makes it impossible for you to play. What do you do then? So it's like, this is kind of like his second calling in many ways.
Do you feel like there's any other genres you play with? Because again, we were talking about music before, and I love the Archie's comic, and the reason I enjoyed that was because that you get to see music in comics, something that's static that you usually listen to. So do you feel like in that regard, the Dusk plays with? I mean, we could say music, but any other genres, or is it pure superhero?
There's a little music. There's, I think the big thing we're blending is crime fiction. The big idea with my favorite kind of crime fiction puts the spotlight on the world, like, and lets readers like experience the world without it feeling like homework or feeling like medicine. Like you just see the world as it is. There's a mystery involved, but you're also learning as you go. So I wanted to blend those aspects of crime fiction with superheroes, which it's not a novel idea. You see crime oriented superheroes all the time, but I didn't want it to feel like we were deconstructing superheroes. It's a love letter to superheroes, but it's also a love letter to crime fiction. And we're trying to weave them both together in a way that feels new and also doesn't feel like extreme, I guess.
That's awesome. And also, I am a big fan of father-daughter storylines. But can you tell us a bit about Jaime's relationship with his daughter and why you included her in the book as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, the three co-creators, Elizabeth, David, and I, we're all parents. Our kids are different ages. My oldest is 5. I think Elizabeth's is a 6th grader or a 7th grader, and David is an older teenager. So we all can see it from different perspectives, and we really wanted to give Jaime a contrast. Like we wanted to play with the idea of the sidekick, but we didn't want to do something where she's like called into action and she puts on a costume and she fights in the streets. And, we didn't want child endangerment. We wanted her to like kind of push forward the idea of the sidekick when she does discover who he is. If she does, that's going to be part of the story. Like she starts to question, like, where is he going? Like, what is he doing? Like, he's usually so attentive and like engaged, and now he seems a little distracted. And that's part of the narrative. Like, well, how does she figure it out? Like, what does he do when she does figure it out? And how can she help him? Because their dynamic is the core of the book, like the Jaime Dawn dynamic. And it's really important to have, it's a love letter to our kids too, to have this quick-witted sidekick type character to play off. And it's been really fun to write her.
And do you think you'll be playing with the tropes of like legacy characters? Because, comics is so rooted in legacy.
Yeah, I think so. I don't want to give too much away, but there's definitely going to be a moment of realization when Jaime discovers the truth behind why he got the stuff he did when he got it.
I don't know if this is a question or not, but I'll read it out anyways. Do we count gymnastics as a sport? Like, I think Harley originally could do the thing she could because she used to do gymnastics in college. Yeah, I guess it is a question. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely count gymnastics as a sport. So
it's in the Olympics, right? Then it kind of has to be a sport. I
think by default, yeah.
By default, for sure.
And some other cool questions. So. Yes, the question is definitely like a big influence. And Dr. Midnight, we do get a Dr. Midnight vibe. David did an amazing job with designing the character. When we were going back and forth, he was like, well, what do you want? I said, I want it to feel timeless. I wanted to kind of evoke give that idea of like Batman and Daredevil and Hour Man, that kind of timeless, simple vibe. And he really hit it out of the park with the iconic like Dusk logo and the kind of collar flaps and the cape. And I love the visor, which looks very Nexus, which is a favorite of mine.
We also have a question from the same person. Be curious what kind of foes and rivals he will encounter.
Yeah, we're going to see his rivals on two levels. You know, in the legal space, he's a public defender, so he's often in court defending people charged with crimes, and so he's at odds with the Blackstone DA, who's a very ambitious woman named Marisol, who sees Jaime as just a threat, as kind of like this annoyance that is always like tripping her up, because he's a good lawyer, you know, so it's not as easy for her to just kind of keep the machinery moving. And I think a big part of it is, you know, today there's a lot of plea deals and a lot of like, you know, just moving people along and cycling people into prison. And I think Jaime in this story, without getting too like heavy handed, like isn't up for that. So he's much more willing to fight for his clients and be more of a thorn in her side. And we'll see a lot of like sort of rogues like during the graphic novel. I don't want to give them away too much, but there is a big bad who's like pulling the strings behind the scenes, and we'll see who that may be and how it ties into Jaime's past in the final chapter.
And speaking of it being a graphic novel, what made you want to make it a graphic novel compared to a traditional miniseries? And obviously, I know you're on Kickstarter, but how do you feel like selling the book is different as a graphic novel compared to floppy miniseries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we wanted to just have like a first season. We wanted to have that first arc. You know, part of the challenge is with like pitching it around is that we didn't have any guarantees that we would get to tell the first story. You know, like you could get signed up by a publisher and they put out 2 issues and then you're canceled and you're kind of, that's it, you're out of luck. So the idea with Kickstarter was we can get this funded and then we will at least have told the first arc, you know, the 4 issues. And I love what Omnis did in that they're giving backers the option to buy the floppies. You can buy the 4 floppies. You can just buy the first issue, or you can buy the whole graphic novel. And we've really got like a who's who of artists like doing variant covers and pinups. So I think it's the best of both worlds. I envisioned it as a graphic novel, as a kind of one and done story that gives you that first season, but we're also doing it with the idea that it'll be split into 4 issues as well.
And Ben asks about the daughter. Is it based on anyone's child, or where did you get her personality from?
It's not based on any one child in particular. I think as parents, the 3 of us, Elizabeth, David, and I, have different experiences, but we definitely wanted her to be this super independent, very smart and sharp, quick-witted teenager. We wanted her to kind of call him on his stuff, you know, and really like be outspoken and confident. And in many ways, children are much sturdier and stronger than we are. Like I wanted to show that. Like Jaime is fretting about everything, and Dawn is much more like in control of her world and confident about what she's doing. And I wanted to show a healthy like parent-child dynamic. Like sometimes so many superhero stories are about, oh, you're my son, or, you know, you're just discovering these things, or they're, you know, like the Batman and Robin relationships are fraught to varying degrees. I wanted this to be healthy. Like they get along, and they're divorced. Like he's divorced from her mom. And they had her when he was relatively young, because now he's like in, I guess, early 30s and she's a teenager. So they've almost grown up together, which is, you know, you see that frequently.
Do you get to see a bit of the story of the, you know, divorced parents? Or do you get to see the other parent very often, or is it really just the father-daughter relationship?
No, you see her mom pretty quickly, and again, we wanted to show that these relationships can be healthy. You know, like sometimes people split up and it's not this chaotic moment. It's actually like 2 adults that just realize that it's time they're better off as friends and co-parents than in a romantic relationship. And so I think we all wanted to show that. I mean, it's just important to show that can work.
And the big question is there more plans for this series after this graphic novel, or is it a one and done?
Yeah, no, we definitely have plans for more, and we'd love to, you know, kind of see what happens. You know, once the Kickstarter is funded, fingers crossed, we'll shift our focus to making sure we can tell the best story possible and make sure that it really delivers on all the, you know, support that we've gotten. And we have like a season 2 and a season 3 like roughly outlined. So hopefully we get the chance to do more.
And would you like to do more Kickstarter projects in general for your future indie endeavors or even your novels? There's another I'm sure avenue with that as well with Kickstarter, which I don't know personally a lot about, but I've seen people do it.
I've seen people do it, and I think what was it? JT Krull just did like an illustrated novel that he just got funded, which was great. I don't know if I do it for my novels. I know it's a path, but it's definitely something I'm going to keep in my back pocket for other indie comic stuff. Like whether it's that I don't think there's a traditional home for it, or if it's something that I just want to have more control over. And once you have one successful Kickstarter, you've created that foundation of support, so you can go back to them and really tap into that audience again.
We do have a question for Jenna. And guys, if you have any questions for Alex, definitely ask in the comments below. But they asked, what do you think makes a good story?
That's a great question. And I think the best stories have strong characters. I mean, without characters, characters for me are what gets me into a story. If I don't care about the characters, I'm just not invested. Like no matter how compelling the plot is or how big the twist is, if I'm not invested in the characters, I just don't care. And it sounds cruel, but it's like I need to care about the characters and want to be in their world. So once it's great characters, really strong conflict, and you have to really have a solid twist. I think so many people like read things and try to expect to know what's coming and try to understand or predict. We live in such an information heavy world. Like you can check out from anything at any point. You can be reading an ebook and suddenly get bored and hop onto your phone and do something else. You can be watching a movie and just quit in a second. Like when I was a kid, you had like the channels you had. So if you caught a show, like you probably didn't want to change the channel like in the middle of the show. And that's a long-winded way of saying like people have more options now. So you have to make it compelling. And you have to make the characters interesting. And with interesting characters, you kind of just let them do their thing, and they will make an interesting story. Whereas no interesting story will make characters interesting. You know what I mean?
100% agree with you on that. One thing I also do want to plug is that we have a crossover print going on right now, which I actually just learned my colorist is coloring it. So I'm happy about that. He was under the weather, but he said, "Hey, can I do a live coloring of it?" I'm like, "Dude, you were sick, but okay."
Yes.
I think he did it like today, so hopefully we get that print soon. Cool. That'd be cool. Yeah. So this is our black and white version of the print. It will be colored. Hopefully I can send the live version of it when that goes up. I think it's on his Facebook. But yeah, if you back up both campaigns digitally, you'll get a digital version of this. If you back it both physically, you'll get a physical version of this. But there's a cool catch. If you get both books physically, there's going to be one lucky winner who gets a signed version of it by both me and Alex. So that'll be the only person who gets the signed version, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, no, it's neat that, Kickstarter brought our characters together. It's kind of cool. And we did this one, and Dean Haspiel has a character called the Red Hook. So when I asked him to do a Dusk pinup, he drew the Dusk and the Red Hook. And then George Cambadeus, who's the artist on the Black Ghost, when he was like, "Oh, can I do something?" I said, "For sure, but let's put our characters together." So Lara and Jaime are teaming up in that world, in that pinup. So it's neat. It's just kind of neat to create this continuity that doesn't superhero stories are so much about team ups and continuity and crossovers that it's nice to play in that space.
And how do you feel about the Kickstarter community in general? Because a lot of those, like for me and you, because we both had campaigns at the same time, we were able to do it. But like, what have you learned about the community? Because I feel like that's such a big part of Kickstarter.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I've been supporting Kickstarters for a long time. I really like the platform, and I love getting books from creators I admire. And so it was really a warm welcome, especially from the campaigns that I had supported. They saw that I was coming in with this, and they were very quick to plug and share and promote. And there's a lot of Kickstarter focused press, like different outlets that only cover crowdfunded stuff, or at least have a column every week about like the best crowdfunded campaigns and what's going on. So it's really an interesting like subset of the industry, but it's, as a community, it's really supportive. Like you've obviously been awesome, and other Kickstarters have been really, really great at reaching out and just saying, how can we help, and trading plugs and things like that. And even Kickstarter itself has been really great about saying, hey, we see this is coming. We'll give you like the project we love plug. And it's felt very welcoming, which is nice.
Yeah,
Like we're all in it together. There's no like we're all competing but not competing. Like it's not a race.
Yeah, it's like it's a big ecosystem because I think we all understand that, yeah, it's not really a competition because if one project does really well, it brings more people to the platform. So
Mhm.
other projects can do really well, which is really cool
Right.
to see, especially in the last like 2 years, that Boom had their Kickstarter and then Scott had his Kickstarter. So it's kind of cool just to see the platform growing and more people backing Kickstarters.
Yeah.
We also have a question from Ben, which I know the answer to this, so I'll try to shift it to something else. But have you worked on any Archie titles such as Sonic or Archie himself? You have. So if you want to plug any of your previous stuff or
Yeah,
any future stuff
I've
you
written
want to work on.
I've written a ton of Archie stuff. I wrote my first full comic was Archie going to Comic-Con, which was a single issue of Archie and Friends. I've done a bunch of those like one-off like Archie, classic Archie adventures. But the big stuff I've done is the music crossovers, like Archie Meets Kiss, Archie Meets Ramones, the Archie's book, which was an ongoing series with Matt Rosenberg and Joe Eisma, where we kind of chronicle the band for 8 issues. And during their tour and their journey, they cross over with other bands like Blondie and the Monkees, Tegan and Sarah, Churches, and a bunch of them. And the B-50, we did a B-52s crossover not long ago. That was a lot of fun. So, excuse me, I'm always up for doing more stuff with Archie. I grew up on Archie. That was like my first comic book experience. And it's, now I oversee a lot of the editorial stuff. So it feels like I don't want to give myself the plum assignment. So I'm not writing as much, but, sometimes stuff falls on my desk and I have to do it. So,
I mean, if that Taylor Swift book ever comes, like you're like, okay,
I've
I
got
gotta
dibs
do
on that.
this
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that's mine. No one's gonna take that.
Any other projects that you'd like to plug? I mean, from Archie or just in general that you want people to know about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Dusk is happening now, so that's been my big time suck in a good way. Like it's been exciting to watch unfurl. But I've got the first collection of the Black Ghost is coming out May 5th from Dark Horse in comic shops and bookstores, so that's exciting. My next crime novel is called Secret Identity, and it's coming out next April from Flatiron Books. And it's set in 1975 New York, and it's about a woman who moves from Miami to New York to work in comics. She's a huge fan. She grew up reading comics. So her dream is to write comics, and she takes on this like secretary level job at a fictional publisher. And her boss basically tells her, look, you're never going to write comics. Like I'm giving these gigs to my friends, to my freelancers. Like you should just do what you're doing and don't worry about writing comics. And that's frustrating for her because this is her dream. So she talks to a colleague who's an editor there, and he says, I want to write this new character. Like, will you ghostwrite it with me, and eventually you'll get credit and we'll figure it out. And so she co-writes it, secretly, and then the character becomes a huge hit, except nobody knows she wrote it. Nobody knows she had anything to do with it. And then her collaborator is murdered. And so she has to solve his murder to kind of reclaim this character that nobody knows she had a hand in. And so you'll see a lot of cool cameos. It's set in the comic industry of the 70s, which is, I think, a very interesting time. Like I was, how everyone's always like, oh, comics are dying. They've been saying that for 40, 50 years. Like comics will continue in some form. And I think the 70s, especially the mid 70s, was a particular low point, like right before the direct market started and before comic shops really blew up. So it's been great. It's been fun to write. I'm almost done with it, and I hope people dig it.
And do you feel like your prose could ever bleed into, I mean, obviously it technically has with the storyline with comics, but do you feel like, okay, maybe one day your prose novel can like be adapted into a comic or whatever?
Yeah, I did my Pete Fernandez mystery series. I've been talking to an artist, Greg Scott, about doing it as a graphic novel. It's just having the time to figure out, like, I finished the series. I did the 5 novels and 2 novellas. And so it's like finding that space where you can tell another story, or whether it's a new story, a sequel. And so it's something I think about. I definitely want to do something with those characters in the graphic novel space if I can. And also this novel, Secret Identity, is going to surprise some people that want, there's going to be some elements to it that people are not going to expect.
Do you feel like the prose market and the comic book market ever really crosses paths? Like, do you feel like there could be similar readers that maybe comics aren't tapping into or prose isn't tapping into?
Yeah, I think as you see like something like Random House absorbing the Marvel like direct market distribution, I think is really interesting because now if you're an indie bookstore, you can order Marvel single issues. And I think as you see like comic shops and indie bookstores start to unify their playbooks, like doing virtual events and doing a lot of things in similar ways, you'll see more overlap. Like it's funny because you see novelists come into comics and then they just become comic book writers. Like a lot of people forget that Greg Rucka wrote novels before he came into comics, and a lot of people forget that Peter David, who's written a billion comics, is also a very prolific novelist. So it's almost like they have two audiences, and I hope that as time passes, we start to see that blend together. Like even like Brad Meltzer is a New York Times bestselling novelist, children's book author, but a lot of people just remember him as Identity Crisis and Green Arrow. Like they don't have, they haven't jumped into that space. So I think as marketing becomes more focused, you'll see people like cross promote a lot more. When I did one of my recent crime novels, we had ads in Archie books and in the teen Archie books. And I thought that was a cool bit of synergy, like reminding people that these authors write in other ways.
And that's so interesting to talk about the virtual events as well, because I feel like not all the time, but when a comic comes out, maybe you'll have one signing and you're like, all right, cool, the comic's out.
Yeah.
Because obviously comics come out so frequently as well. With novels, it could take you 5 years to write a novel. It's like, finally, this thing is out. So do you feel like there should be more of that? Like comic book writers should be like doing a tour more often, or publishers should push, creators to do these virtual tours?
Yeah, I think so, especially for like a launch or the trade paperback, like those very significant moments, like this is the beginning and this is the collection that you can read like beginning to end. I did a talk at Comics Pro, which is a big retailer convention or a big retailer meeting, basically explaining how to do virtual events, because I see indie bookstores doing them like with much more frequently and regularly. Like my local indie does one like every other week basically. And I've done a ton of book virtual events, but I haven't seen as many with comics. And I think it's a missed opportunity, especially now with COVID, like people aren't going into stores as much. And so if you want to kind of get some revenue in for events and start promoting certain authors, like, you need a Crowdcast. You basically just need a Crowdcast account and a link to buy. And if you can set that up and have someone that can moderate a panel, then you can start doing virtual events. It sounds much easier when I say it that way, but it's not that much harder,
Especially with retailers and comic book creators or obviously more publishers kind of meeting up and doing that, because it's interesting to see like the Comic Cons, right? They've been trying to do virtual events, but it hasn't really picked up steam as much as I think they've wanted to. So how do you make it interesting to, comic book fans who are more used to the physical everything, right? We love our physical comics. We love interacting at a Comic Con. Like, how do you make it exciting for the fan to want to go to that event?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think you go to comic conventions for that tactile experience, like not holding the comics, getting the statue you want or the toy, or getting your book signed, shaking hands with the talent, and interacting with editors and people. And I don't think you can really get that from a virtual event, but you do get access. You get to talk. And I think something that is beneficial with a virtual event is you get that direct one-on-one time. You get to ask creators a question. You get to listen to them talk. I think if comic shops utilize the tool a little bit more, I mean, you'd almost educate the fandom to kind of get used to it, at least for now, as we're in this weird time where we can't gather in that way.
Or even Kickstarters. I was just kind of thinking about that. I feel like a lot of creators that do Kickstarters, like obviously we're doing kind of a event here. Like you tend to like go on more podcasts or because you have such a short amount of time. You're like, we need to get funded. We need to do this. So be interesting if you take the Kickstarter stance to like traditional publishing.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, I think the challenge, like having done publicity for DC and Archie, is the challenge is there's certain moments in the traditional publishing schedule that you need to hit. Announcement, solicitation, FOC, on sale, and each of those beats in the timeline require different press. Like you want mainstream press when it's on sale. Like if you see something in the New York Times, you don't want someone to be like, oh, I have to order it. Like you want them to be able to walk into the store and get it. With Kickstarter, it's a plateau, but it's limited. So you just hit hard as many times as you can within that span, and it doesn't really matter like what order or when. So yeah, I mean, I guess my point is like the publishing timeline ebbs and flows. Like there's peaks and valleys. Like between the announcement and between solicitation is a quiet period. Between solicit and FOC is a little bit of a quiet period. But I'd love to see people doing more. I think you kind of see the one blip for each part of the timeline, and I think if you really want to get eyeballs on a project, you have to hammer it from beginning to end.
I 100% agree. And it's interesting, like for me playing kind of both sides, where it's like, okay, I see it from the press point of view and then I see it from, writing comics. So it's cool to kind of see like, okay, well, this book's coming out in like 2 days. We need to, we need to get this article up or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely interesting. We have a lot of great questions in the comments too. So I don't want to ignore those. Comb 22, this is about your novel coming up. Where is the best place for people to pre-order that?
The best place would be Amazon. It's not up on Amazon yet. The pre-order page is not up yet, so it'll be up pretty soon, and I'll tweet about it once it's ready and remind people. But it's coming out in April of next year. So Secret Identity from Flatiron Books.
Would you say Amazon's the best place to support pros? Because again, it's so like it's for indie creators, going back to the comics for a second. It's just like for Kickstarter, right? Like as an indie creator for me, who's not with a publisher for this book, it's like, okay, you have to support the Kickstarter. Like, yeah, maybe if it's fully funded, you could go to my Etsy store later or whatever, but that's the best way to show support because it shows how many people are interested in this comic and get other people's eyes. And then obviously traditional publishing has different ways to like, okay, buy it from your comic book store, make sure it's on your pull list. So for pros, what do you think is like the best for people to buy the book and to support you?
I think the best, whatever is your best path to what's your most convenient way. Like if you go to your indie bookstore, get it there. If you want to check it out, indie bookstores, your library, bookshop.org, Amazon, Audible, it's going to be on all those platforms. And I don't want to say only go to Amazon because I want to get to like 500 reviews. Like I think if that happens, great. But, some people are averse to Amazon and they don't want to shop there. And I understand that. So, that's why there's places like Bookshop where you can go buy the hard copy at your store or check it out from your library. I think libraries have to buy the books that you check out. So it's a win either way. So.
Which is interesting about the Amazon stuff is that, obviously from what I've seen, and I've gotten in the pros a little bit more since the pandemic. I've wanted to read different stuff. So I'm like, okay, how do I like kind of split my time? I'd read some prose stuff. And you do notice like Goodreads and Amazon's a great place to like get people to understand that this is a big book. So even if you don't buy from Amazon, you can still give that 5-star review because you can still leave that 5-star review. Yeah,
because you've read it, so you can hop onto Goodreads and give it a good review. And I think people spend too much time like looking at their Amazon ratings and just seeing how many reviews they have. Like a book can be a huge hit and have 40 reviews. It's not one for one. So
we also have a question from Janet. What do you think of Riverdale?
What do I think of Riverdale? I mean, I like it. I think I'm biased. Obviously, I work at Archie. So, I think what happened over the 10 years leading up to Riverdale, though, is people started to see the characters changed in terms of their backdrop. You could have Archie battling the Predator. You could have Archie meeting Kiss. You could have Archie in a zombie apocalypse. And people got used to the idea of the IP, not to get all corporate, but these characters could be in different settings and they were still Archie, they were still Betty and Veronica and Jughead. So as long as the core characters are true to that source material, you can do whatever you want. And so having like a noir teen drama like 90210 meets Twin Peaks may have sounded bonkers like 15 years ago if you thought of Archie only as, Archie and Betty in the chocolate shop and everything's, a kind of a comedy moment. It's like more sitcom-ish. But I think the publishing really teed everyone up for Riverdale. So people were ready for that. And I think it's an interesting take. It's fun. It's good drama. It's good popcorn TV. Like I have no problem with it.
We also have a question from Ben. If this Kickstarter takes off and funded, would you be open to being approached for adaptation of your work?
I would
right?
love that.
Make money.
Yeah, sure. I would love that. We definitely envisioned it as something that could translate easily into animation or, live action would be cool too. But I think we did it with that in mind, like knowing that it could be easily one for one if somebody was interested.
So would you want like a writer's team to approach you and be like, take it? Or would you actually want to like come up with the TV spec and like, pitch it around?
I think whether I did it or somebody approached me, I'd want to be involved to some degree. Like even if a company came in and said, we want to option this and we want to make a animated show from the Dusk, I would want to have some involvement, whether it's like giving feedback or writing a couple episodes or just being in the room, like just to learn. Like I think I would learn so much just being in the room and watching how these things come together.
We also have a question from Janet in the same vein. Who should play Jaime? I can never give a straight answer with these type of questions.
Yeah, that's, I'm glad you asked that, and you're not the first to ask that, which is good. Like I was thinking someone like Jay Hernandez, who was in, I think he was in the Twilight movies, but he's also in that Magnum PI reboot. He's just got that kind of, baseball player look. And, Jaime is Latinx. So I wanted, you'd want the actor to also reflect that.
Well, it seems like those are all the questions. Those are all my questions. I'm going to plug the Kickstarter one more time. Please, guys, go support the Kickstarter. It really is the best way. First of all, that way you could get funded, but
yes.
It also is the best way to support these books to make them, come to life. But yeah, Alex, anything else that you'd like to shout out? Go follow Alex on Twitter.
Janet has another question. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, since he's a public defender, how much research did you have to do for any of his cases? I've got friends and some family. My wife's cousin is a public defender, so I've definitely picked her brain a little bit, and will continue to pick her brain. I have a friend who is a public defender in Florida, so we've chatted a little bit, and we'll be talking more as we get more in the weeds. But my wife's a lawyer too. She's not a public defender, but she knows the law. So that's been helpful as well. So yeah, I've definitely just been, bothering the lawyers I know that either are public defenders or are in that space. So it's been helpful. And we definitely want it to ring true, even if it is this like fictionalized superhero story. You never want something to pull somebody out of the story where they're like, oh, that could not happen,
It's nice that you can ask questions to people, because I find it so much harder to do research where it's like, okay, I'll go on the internet. I find it easier to go on YouTube. Like if I don't know anybody in that field, it's like go to a vlog or something and go to someone in that field to talk about it, because you get to like hear someone actually talk about their experience and be like, okay, I might not live this, but you could like follow their journey through like their YouTube stuff.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm the opposite. Like I'd much rather like find something to read.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
It's probably like just different eras, I guess, even though we're not that far apart yet. Where can people follow me? I'm on Twitter at Alex_Segura, and my website is alexsegura.com. And I have a Facebook page and an Instagram, though my Instagram is private because I put pictures of my kids, so it's not really for everybody.
Well, thank you again for coming on. Please follow Alex everywhere. Go follow that Kickstarter. It is in the chat. And thank you guys for watching. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye. Thanks, everybody.